So today we start with talking about cardiopulmonary science. And the purpose of the session is to discuss the structural and functional basis. Can all of you hear me? So to discuss the structural and functional basis of cardiopulmonary symptoms and signs, like history and examination. But we won't be talking about how to take history and how to perform physical examination. That you will be doing in pro skills. Okay. What we'll be talking about is the selected few symptoms and signs which typically present in a patient having cardiac or pulmonary problems, and we'll try to figure out like how to assess that, what wrong may be going on. But why do we want to do this? Before we go into that, actually these used to be 3 sessions or 3 hours. But this year we reduced some lectures, so this lecture also this session also got reduced to 2 hours. So I'll need to be a little bit faster so that we can cover that material in 2 hours. So to discuss why we want to do this session, first tell me why you want to become doctors. Why you want to do medicine? Why you want to become physicians? You're not sure by the end of you're third. Yes, go ahead. How would you help other people?
Save their lives.
How would you save their lives?
By treating.
Yeah. So you want whatever they have problems, so you want to diagnose it and treat it so that you can help them. So how would you diagnose it? And history. So you need information from the patient. So history and examination. So to get that data, so you need to develop certain skills. You need to develop the skill of observation. That is very, very important. Just by looking at the patient. Did you get a chance to? Yeah. Did you?
Yeah.
So now you realize the importance of clinical observation and patient-doctor interaction, and the importance of physical examination. These days, unfortunately, you go to a physician. Like I had some GI problem last month. I went to a gastroenterologist. He even do my upper GI endoscopy as well. Alhamdulillah as well, but he did not have a look at my abdomen. He did not even check my pulse. Like he did not touch me while I was awake. Like I had one appointment with him, about 20 minutes of interaction across the table, and he said, okay, we'll do the EGD. And on the day of EGD, while I was awake, there was no touch. Then I was sedated. Then endoscopy was done. And my shirt was buttoned, so I'm sure he did not have a look at my abdomen. He doesn't know if there's a scar, if there's a hepatomegaly. So this is not good. We use the technology, but we also should not forget the human interaction and human touch and the care and the importance of thorough history and physical examination. So that is very important. And those of you who have watched that video, you realize the importance. So you need to develop that observation, that skill, and obviously then you do the history and examination, so you gather some data. Then you need to develop this ability to analyze that data, what to make of that data, how to synthesize that data. And from there you arrive at diagnosis and you develop clinical judgment. Then you say, okay, most likely this patient has this problem. So this clinical judgment again comes with time. But for that you need to have that patient-doctor interaction. So hopefully with time you will develop these skills. So here what we'll be trying to do, we'll be trying to figure out if there is a problem. Like suppose someone says, I have breathlessness. Why this patient has breathlessness? First, will tell you how to auscultate the chest. And when the clinicians discuss, they will tell you, okay, with interstitial lung disease, with left heart failure, they will develop breathlessness. But when there is a breathlessness, what wrong might be going on in the body? Because the patient doesn't know which system has the problem or what is wrong. he will come to you with breathlessness. So when you understand like what leads to the development of breathlessness and what can be the different possible underlying mechanisms and causes, only then you will ask the relevant questions. Only then you will look for those signs. So eyes don't see what my mind doesn't know. So you need to know these things so that you can ask the relevant questions, you can extract the relevant information and reach a most likely diagnosis. Okay? So that's the purpose of this session. So William Osler once said that he who studies medicine without books sails an uncharted sea. But he who studies medicine without patients does not go to sea at all. So that gives you the importance of the patient. Patients are your best teachers. Learn from patients. Whenever you go to hospital, learn from them. Just interact with them, spend time with them, and examine them, talk to them, take their history, and you will learn a lot. So this is obviously like you must have learned already. This is not our objective today, but this is very important. That how do you interact with patient? How do you start? Like how do you communicate with them? And in these days, and always don't forget to wash your hand before the interaction and after the interaction. That is very important. Now, especially because of this COVID situation, you need to do that. But even before that, it was important. And because of that, in most of the examination situations, like when you do USMLE clinical skills exam or you do other like PACES or like MRCP exams, if you do not wash your hand before touching the patient, they will fail. Like in USMLE, I don't know these days, but in my time, like it was the rule. Like you do a thorough, like everything you do 100%, but if you forget to wash your hand, you're sure failure. So make it a habit. Either you sanitize or you wash, but you do something. And you obviously you have to respect their privacy. You have to earn their trust. Patients trust you with everything, like the things which they don't trust their near and dear ones. They trust you with those things. So you have to earn that trust and you have to respect that trust. So what are different components of history? Again, like you already know, like you have done those different components of history. Hello. Okay, family history, but before that, the first thing, yes, some demographic information, but then they must have come with some complaints. So you got that presenting complaint and you take, you try to elaborate that and then you go into other things. So you have all these aspects of history that I'm sure you must have done it. Huh? So coming back to our actual topic, so we will be talking about certain presentations. So those will be the presenting complaints. So let's talk about how do you elaborate those presentations. So whenever there is a symptom or presenting complaint, there are certain questions that you need to ask to elaborate it. Usually for pain, but for other complaints as well. And for that, like they use this mnemonic Socrates or OPQ or STA for any problem, especially for pain. What are those questions that we need to? Very good. So you need to ask all these questions. So when you start, is there anything which makes it worse? Is there anything which makes it better? What is the quality of or character of that symptom? Where it is? Now again, for every symptom, you don't ask this question. Suppose pain, you need to ask where is the pain? The swelling, where is the swelling? But I remember like one of our initial batches, like one of your seniors, like I think it was his end of second year something. Like in those days we had a small setup, so we used to do posters as well, and it was an OSPE. Like at the end of the year, so there was an OSPE or OSCE. I should say OSCE. It was OSCE. So even our in-house faculty, we used to be SPs as well as the examiners. So on one station, I was SP as well as the examiner, and he was supposed to take history, and I was supposed to have fever. It was history for fever. So he said, "Okay, what is wrong with you?" I said, "I have a fever." And he said, "Where is the fever?" So you don't just memorize and go by tuck 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 like this. And like me and on the other station, Dr. M. Jakin was sitting and like he also heard that and we couldn't stop laughing. So, so again, use your common sense. So you need to elaborate on any presenting complaint. So what are different cardinal cardiopulmonary symptoms and signs? What do you think? Okay, so cough, dyspnea, okay, palpitations. Good. So these are related to mostly cardiopulmonary. So we have breathlessness, including orthopnea and PND. We have cough and hemoptysis, chest pain, limb pain. Is it? I think is it visible? So I should not use this color. Or is it like blurring from up here as well? Well, with this, I have uploaded this presentation on Moodle as well. And it's the same as last year as well. So you have the recording from last year as well. So you can. So we have chest pain, limb pain, palpitations. Limb pain or intermittent claudication is related to peripheral vascular disease. So it's again covered in CBP. And syncope, fatigue, ankle swelling or edema, that can both be a symptom as well as a sign. So, and then we have cyanosis, abnormalities of breath sounds, abnormalities of heart sounds, raised JVP, heart murmurs, all those things. And then there can be certain red flags, like someone has weight loss, someone has hemoptysis. So these are red flags. Okay, so let's start with breathlessness or dyspnea. Okay. So what is breathlessness? So it's an urge, a feeling of an uncomfortable need to breathe. So it's an uncomfortable feeling, and one feels that the person needs to breathe. And it's subjective experience. So some people can have like more feeling at the given hypoxia compared to the other person, and the intensity can vary. And then there are multiple other physiological, psychological, and mental factors involved, and that can affect the subsequent behavior as well. Okay, so it's a sensory symptom. It's urge to breathe, and obviously one feels out of breath and all those things, air hunger. So what could be the mechanisms? So the sensation, the problem is in the chest, but the sensation originates in cortex. It's a cerebral cortical problem. That's where the sensation originates. The problem may be in the system, but the sensation of this urge to breathe comes from cerebral cortex, and the respiratory and cardiac disease, which can stimulate the breathing and dyspnea by stimulating the intrapulmonary sensory nerves. For example, in pneumothorax, interstitial lung disease, pulmonary embolus, there can be increased mechanical load on the respiratory muscles. So there can be a stimulation of the intrapulmonary sensory nerves. There can be stimulation of our somatic nerves on the skeletal muscles. So when there is increased workload on these muscles, or there can be whenever there is a problem. Subsequently, if there is a problem in breathing, so they develop hypoxia, or hypercapnia, or acidosis for any other reason. So that again can stimulate chemoreceptors, and that also leads to this feeling of breathlessness. Okay. Now, couple of things I need to clarify, because over the past 3-4 years we have seen, I think this is the 4th year that I'm doing this, because this is the very first day, and these signs and symptoms involve both cardio, CVS as well as pulmonary systems. And when we speak of signs and symptoms, so obviously I have to name diseases as well. So that which you will learn over the next 7 weeks. So on the very first day, when you hear so many diseases, some people panic. So please don't panic. You will learn these things over the next 7 weeks. We have LGDs, which will cover those specific presentations, like we have LGD on dyspnea, cough, and hemoptysis. We have LGD on chest pain. We have LGD on palpitation. We have LGD on heart murmur. So we'll discuss further details over there. And then we have also like clinical lectures where you will do these presentations. We have TPLs where you discuss these presentations in detail, their mechanisms. So you will learn these things over there. The other problem that we face, the students face, is this confusion that which of these will come in midterm, and which because end of term can include anything, but the question is what you need to cover in the midterm. So again, this is again like complemented with other sessions, so it's not like isolated session. So the same things will be in your PPL and all those. Obviously, midterm is more focused on CVS, cardiovascular system. So things related to CVS will be asked more, but again, these presentations cannot be separated. The patient with cardiac problem, left heart failure can also develop breathlessness. Patient with asthma can also develop breathlessness. So breathlessness as a symptom can be asked, like, but again, it will be in a clinical perspective. So the scenario will tell you what it is. Obviously, we'll focus more on cardiovascular system. Things which are specific for respiratory, obviously, they will be more in the end of term exam. End of term can include anything. Okay? So suppose even sir, I have chest pain can be anything, breathlessness can be anything, but I can, like in midterm, there can be, I can ask a question, okay, a person comes in with breathlessness and he has a history of long-standing hypertension and previous MI, and he also wakes up at night from breathlessness. So you know, and if I ask what is the most likely diagnosis, obviously there will be more information. So by the midterm, you will know what it is. And you can say this is a left heart failure. And the wrong options, I can include respiratory problems as well as like pneumothorax or asthma. So the diagnoses which are related to respiratory may be written there as wrong options, but like the case will be very obvious. So don't panic about that as well, okay? So here you can see we have, when I go get away from mic, can you hear me at the back? No? Okay. So you can see here like in diseases where we have increased mechanical load. For example, in asthma, so they need to put in more breathing effort. So the efforts go through spinal efforts. This information are sometimes like in airway obstruction, like asthma and emphysema. So there is increased PaCO2, which leads to acidosis. So it's type 2 respiratory failure. So that leads to decreased pH, and that will stimulate central chemoreceptors. Similarly, we have intraparenchymal nerve endings, which can get stimulated in different situations like pulmonary embolism, or interstitial lung disease, or like deflation like pneumothorax, and this information travels via vagal efferents, and all this information is going to brainstem. Or if there is any ventilation perfusion mismatch leading to hypoxemia, so reduced PaO2 or increased PaCO2 is sensed by thyroid bodies. Again, that information goes to brainstem. So all this information goes to brainstem, and then there's a modulation by limbic drives and cortical drives, and that all leads to this sensation of breathlessness. Okay, and the breathlessness is usually felt in proportion to the sum of these stimuli. So in a given disease, different stimuli are going. So suppose someone has asthma, so they will have hypoxia, they will have elevated PaCO2, so there will be stimulation of chemoreceptors. At the same time, because of airway narrowing, they need to put in more effort to generate that negative pressure to breathe in. So there will be increased workload on the respiratory muscles. So again, the spinal efforts will also come into play. So all these, and if they have more hypoxia, so again the thyroid body will also come into play. So all these stimuli work together, depending on what is the problem. And these are again the same thing but signaling pathways. So see the efferents from the lung mechanoreceptors and the upper airways are going to the brainstem as well as to the cortex, to the sensory cortex, and then you have internal loops from the brainstem to the cortex and from the motor cortex to the sensory cortex, and then eventually when there's this urge, so the efferents come from the motor cortex to the upper airways as well as to the respiratory muscles including diaphragm to put in more effort. Don't worry about this slide. This will be more relevant when we do LGD on breathlessness. By the time you have done all the respiratory causes, this is just to show you that different diseases can have different underlying mechanisms. And then there are other things which you will learn later. So I haven't put this slide in your Moodle presentation which I uploaded. I removed this one. Here, like for at this moment, probably the cardiac causes would be relevant, like left heart failure, pericardial disease. Again, leads to increased worker breathing, more drive, hypoxemia, and stimulation of vascular and pulmonary receptors. But don't worry about this slide at the moment. Okay? So when you have dyspnea, you want to know how severe it is. So you want to grade the dyspnea. You want to know whether it is coming in with exertion or is it present at rest. You want to know, does it come in episodes or attacks, like is it paroxysmal? You want to know, does it come at night? So is it nocturnal? And you want to know, does it get worse in any specific posture, like for example while lying down or during sleep, so orthopnea or PND. So you want to look at these attributes, so you want to ask those questions. And that will give you a clue to the underlying pathology, like underlying disease. So severity, again, it can be just uncomfortable awareness of breathing to a frightening sensation of fighting for breath. So it can be like someone gets breathless only on strenuous exercise, to getting a breathless like even at rest, a minimal activity. So this is the severity spectrum, and so they have designed like different scales. In cardiology, they usually use this New York Heart Association scale. It's also called heart failure classes. Similar, again, starting from class 1 to 4, mild to severe. And in pulmonology, usually they use this modified MRC dyspnea scale, again from 0 to 4, the similar classification. Okay, you don't need to memorize these classes at the moment. Probably if the cardiology people they teach you, then probably yes, you need to know that. They might ask you. Again, when they ask, like usually these questions will be based on clinical scenarios. So you don't know whether the clinician is asking or I am asking, who is asking. So if they are teaching you this and they insist that you need to know, then probably yes, you need to know. But otherwise, from my point of view, as long as you know there's a spectrum, is fine. So what is orthopnea? Yeah, so breathlessness that starts or worsens on lying flat. Why does that happen? Can you be a little louder? Okay, why would it go to lung? Why would they be like? Why would it go to heart failure? So why it happens on lying flat? Okay, so the one thing is abdominal, the other thing is gravity. Okay, good. So if you talk about mechanism, so lying flat changes the respiratory mechanics. If you remember your first year, the respiratory mechanics, how the chest wall muscles work and the outward expansion of the chest wall. So that mechanics changes while you're sitting versus while you're lying. So it becomes a little bit difficult to breathe while you're lying. Number two, as you said, the diaphragm gets pushed up in the recumbent position. So when I'm standing, so with gravity, the abdominal viscera are like pushed down, but when I'm lying, so the abdominal viscera push on the diaphragm, so there's less space for lungs to expand. So again, difficult to breathe. And that happens in pregnancy as well. So one is like the mechanics problem. Number two, because of loss of gravity, there's increased venous return. So if someone has left ventricular failure, then that ventricle is not able to cope up with that increased venous return, and that leads to pulmonary congestion. So that's why lying flat increases so makes them like breathless because of they start developing pulmonary congestion and pulmonary edema. So they start sleeping while not in a flat position, but they keep increasing their flows. So they may not realize that they are having breathlessness while lying flat because they are not lying flat. They feel comfortable, okay, increasing, making 2 flows, 3 flows. So they will not complain of orthopnea. So you need to ask the patients how many flows do they take. Have they increased the number of flows recently? So you need to ask this question. Because sometimes patients don't know, like they don't feel like there's a problem. They just, wherever they are comfortable, they adjust to that. And the paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, similar to orthopnea, a little bit different. Like usually patients wake up from sleep with severe breathlessness and cough with expectoration, and that gets relieved in 5 to 10 minutes when they sit up and they take in some fresh air. So they go to sleep, and then all of a sudden, a couple of hours later, they wake up, and they are severely breathless. Why does that happen? Because what happens usually at 2 a.m., like as we are in sleep, our like circulatory volume kind of increases. So in 24 hours, the maximum circulatory volume is at around 2 a.m. and a person who sleeps at night, okay? Because of probably hormonal changes. So venous return keeps increasing, it's building up, and that increases the pulmonary venous pressure. And that because we are sleeping, so our conscious level is reduced. So initially we don't feel that increasing pulmonary congestion, and breathlessness is not felt that much. But at a certain point, when it goes beyond our tolerance, then the person wakes up, and when he wakes up, then he's very breathless. And sometimes, wheezing is a feature of like airway narrowing, which we do in respiratory system, which happens especially in asthma. But sometimes, because of in such situations when there is pulmonary congestion and pulmonary edema, so sometimes it is endothelial edema, which can lead to airway narrowing, and then these patients might have sometimes wheezing as well. And sometimes they name it cardiac asthma, but it's not a typical feature of cardiac problems. Okay, so in exams, if they say wheezing, you think of airway narrowing, like respiratory asthma, things like that. Okay. Pulmonary edema again, when frank pulmonary edema develops, so the dyspnea becomes very marked, and then that brings in hypoxia, leading to cyanosis, cough, and expectoration. Now again, the only time when we discuss cough in cardiac problems is with left heart failure and mitral stenosis, and they might develop this cough and expectoration of big amount of frothy sputum, which is tinged with blood, so pink frothy sputum. So pink frothy sputum. So only time the sputum you hear is because of this thing. Left heart failure, mitral stenosis. So they have pink frothy sputum, cough, and breathlessness. Otherwise, cough and all other problems of cough and sputum are in the respiratory system. Okay. So cause of breathlessness, again, you have to look at the duration, whether it's acute dyspnea, chronic exertional dyspnea, and you have to look at which system might be involved, like cardiac or respiratory. So causes can be different in different systems. But my approach usually is, I need to like to do it systematically. Like suppose someone is coming in with breathlessness, so there is a problem. Like eventually, whatever the problem, like they are developing hypoxia or hypercapnia or acidosis. So what I try to understand, like I try to go from outside to inside. So the outside, what can be the problem in the environment which can lead to breathlessness? High altitude, very good. So if the oxygen partial pressure is low, for example, on a high altitude, that can lead to breathlessness. Now suppose outside, like air is fine, then there can be a problem in taking the air in. So which can be due to either there is an obstruction, like a tumor sitting there somewhere, or there is airway narrowing, like asthma or COPD, or there is a problem with the respiratory musculature, like diaphragm paralysis or like other neuromuscular disorders, kyphosis, scoliosis, these things. can impair the breathing effort. Now suppose this part is fine, air is able to go in, then what can be the problem? Yeah, so there's not enough surface available for exchange. So that could be, suppose if there's a consolidation pneumonia, so you have like part of lung is missing, part of lung is collapsed, or there is say for example pleural effusion, so again the lung is not able to expand, or if there's pregnancy, again there's less space to expand. So if the lungs are not able to utilize the whole surface area, so again the exchange will be reduced and then there will be breathlessness. Then suppose if surface area is fine, but again for exchange you have an exchange membrane, so there can be problem with that, which could be fibrosis. Very good. Fibrosis, pulmonary edema. So again you think of pulmonary edema, then you think of cardiac causes like left heart failure, pulmonary edema, or it can be interstitial lung disease leading to fibrosis. Now suppose if that is fine, exchange is happening, oxygen is going in the blood, then what can be the problem?
Carbon monoxide.
Yeah, so oxygen carrying capacity of the blood is low, so probably there's anemia. So either anemia or there's again heart failure. So heart failure leads to, one thing is pulmonary edema, the other thing is it reduces the cardiac output, so it's not able to make the blood reach the periphery. So again there is hypoxia overall. Even oxygen is there, but heart is not able to pump the blood properly. So reduced cardiac output. So suppose if that's not the problem, oxygen is able to reach there, then what can be the problem? So we have oxygenation, it's reaching everywhere, then
Maybe
what can be?
the release of oxygen.
Sorry?
The release of oxygen at the
Release of oxygen. What?
at the cellular level.
So what can affect the release of oxygen at the cellular level?
Carbon monoxide.
Blood vessels. Sorry? Perfusion. Yeah, that we discussed like this. If there's a heart failure, so cardiac output is low, so perfusion will be low. But if there's no problem with perfusion, sorry? Yeah, so if there is acidosis due to any other reason, if there's a retained CO2 or any other metabolic causes of acidosis, so because of acidosis now they need to get rid of carbon dioxide, so that again leads to breathlessness. So suppose there is no acidosis. One other thing I forgot in the environment was carbon monoxide. If there's carbon monoxide, again that leads to reduced because it has more affinity to bind hemoglobin compared to oxygen, so again there will be hypoxia and restlessness. So now suppose if everything is fine, then what can be the problem? Sorry? Okay, so respiratory center and the brain might be affected. That may be a possibility, but then there won't be respiratory drive. There can be respiratory failure because of that, I agree.
I'm not sure, but I remember in the new cerebral that will push up in the respiratory center.
So yes, so I'm saying respiratory centers can get affected. Yeah, but what else in this besides that? But that problem will lead to respiratory failure, but it may not lead to that urge to breathe because they may have this impaired breathing effort. Panic attack, yes. So psychogenic panic attack. So this is another reason. Or simply it may be just increased demand. You are exercising. So if you develop that systematic approach for every symptom, then it will be easier for you to ask the relevant questions. You would know what likely problem this patient might be having, what wrong can go in terms of structure and function, and then you ask the relevant questions, you get the relevant information, you get a good diagnosis. Okay? So you have cardiovascular, so acute dyspnea and chronic dyspnea. You have different diseases which can happen. We won't go into details of disease at the moment. Probably we'll do them during our LGD. But you need to revise that. Especially COVID-19 also can lead to breathlessness. And then we have other causes like metabolic acidosis, psychogenic, anemia. So we discussed different cases of dyspnea. So cough and hemoptysis, again all these symptoms and signs, they have a function. These signs and symptoms happen just to tell us that there is something wrong in the body going on, so that we prevent it. And sometimes they have a preventive or healing effect as well. So, for example, cough. Cough tells us that there is a problem in the respiratory system, there's something there, and also it helps to clear the airways. So, if there's something lodged in the airways, it helps to clear the airways. So, here we have lots of receptors, cough receptors, located mainly in larynx and supralaryngeal area of trachea, bronchi, and the efferents go through vagus to the cough center and nucleus tractus solitarius, and then the efferents come through spinal motor, phrenic, and vagus nerve, the respiratory muscles. And in cough, what happens? We close the glottis, we generate a lot of positive air pressure, then we open the glottis. So the air comes out with a high velocity because we have a lot of positive pressure, there is dynamic compression of the airways. So there is a narrowing of the airways, which increases the velocity. And that velocity gives you the kinetic energy to dislodge mucus or anything sitting in the airways. Okay? So when someone has cough, you know there is something in the airways which is irritating the airways. So then you ask the relevant questions which can irritate the airways. And in some situations, cough can be impaired. Suppose someone is sedated, so they will have impaired cough. Someone has a stroke, so they have impaired cough. So they have reduced ability to clear the infections or anything which retain secretions which are there. So they are not able to clear them. So that can also lead to problems. But someone who has cough, you want to know their age, which can change the diagnosis. Duration of the cough, if is the cough dry without sputum, or is there a sputum? Like is it productive or non-productive? Productive of a sputum or non-productive of a sputum? Is there an associated breathlessness, tobacco use history, weight loss, fever? And then you want to do the vitals and you want to do the chest examination, chest x-ray. If the cough persists, then you want to do chest x-ray. So it can be, some books say it like acute, subacute and chronic, others say acute versus persistent. So usually whenever there's less than 3 weeks, it's acute, okay? In acute etiologies, you have respiratory tract infections, other noxious chemicals or any aspiration events, and including COVID-19 is important here, as cough. Then you have subacute, which can happen in post-viral pleural syndrome, where the inflammation continues, which continuously irritates the respiratory airways, and people tend to have cough for longer period. And then you have chronic cough, which have wide variety of particular reasons. And when the cough persists for a long time and everything like X-ray and chest exam is normal, then usually it is due to cough with asthma, gastroesophageal reflux, nasopharyngeal drainage, and medications including ACE inhibitors. We will do it next week when we talk about antihypertensives. So you want to know is it a dry or productive, and then you want to know the sputum characteristics, which most of these things you will do in the respiratory system. Only the pink frothy sputum is due to heart failure. And then there can be different characteristics of cough. You will do these things later. But the left ventricular failure cough usually happens at night when they have this congestion. So then they develop. So when they are sleeping, so they wake up with cough as well. Hemoptysis is expectoration of blood from the respiratory tract, from the alveoli to the glottis. So you have to differentiate it from the epistaxis, which is from the upper airways, and you have to differentiate it from hematemesis, which is from the GI tract. Okay? Patients will say they are coughing up blood, but it might be coming from GI tract, it might be coming from upper airways. So you need to ask relevant questions. Mechanisms, again, if there is a chronic inflammatory infective process going on, a neoplastic tumor sitting there, so it can erode into the blood vessels, and that can lead to hemoptysis. Or sometimes there can be extrapulmonary pathology like left ventricular failure or mitral stenosis. That can lead to blood-tinged frothy sputum. Okay, and also when there is chronic inflammatory infective process like tuberculosis, granulomatous inflammation, so there is granulation tissue formation as well. So in the chronic inflammatory and neoplastic process, when this granulation tissue forms, they have a lot of new vessels which are leaky, and that can also lead to hemoptysis. And obviously you need to distinguish it, and you need to know how long it has been there, and is it massive, non-massive, and you want to know associated symptoms. Okay. Obviously, cough hemoptysis can happen due to many respiratory causes, and the cardiovascular main, the special one is mitral stenosis. Okay. Chest pain. Before that, let's talk about what is pain. One thing is like in the morning listening to me. Okay. What else?
It's a combination of both a physical sign as well as a psychological
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yeah. So it has both like physical sensory aspect as well as emotional aspect. You're right, and it's the most common symptom. And again, it signals a disease. As I said, these symptoms tell you that there is a problem going on, and the pain helps you identify the location of the problem. Where is the problem? And sometimes it's also helpful in healing as well, because wherever you are hurt, like if you injure some part, so now touching it hurts, moving it hurts. So you won't touch it, you won't move it. That helps in healing. So it helps in healing process as well. And then you can have like different ways of describing like nociceptive, neuropathic, inflammatory. Again, this is overlapping, but what is important, it helps in healing as well. Now in pain, from our point of view, what you need to know is the difference between the visceral pain and the somatic pain, like ischemic pain, which is usually diffuse. You cannot localize it well. If suppose if I say chest pain and if the physician says, okay, where's the pain? And if I point with my finger, I have pain here, then it's most likely musculoskeletal pain, somatic pain. That's not like ischemic pain or like ischemic pain, usually they will say here. So they are not able to localize and it feels like more like heaviness. So that's why it is important to know the difference between somatic and somatic and visceral pain. Okay. So again, the same features that you need to we discuss the Socrates questions that you need to ask. Again, here in respiratory and cardiac problems, you want to know: does it come with exertion? Does it come with deep rest? Does it come with movement? Again, if it's coming in with movement, then it's not ischemic pain. It's more like a musculoskeletal. And does it get relieved with nitroglycerin? Does it get relieved with rest? So that gives you more relevant information. Again, so same approach as we discussed in breathlessness and chest pain, you need to know what structures are there. And it can be coming from any of these structures. Okay? So, and if you develop the systematic approach, it will help you. So again, here you have cardiac. It can be coming from cardiac origin, it can be pulmonary in origin, GI in origin, or musculoskeletal, or it can be some other cause. So what are different cardiac causes of chest pain? Heart failure will not give you pain. Yes. So angina MI, which is ischemic pain, which will feel like heaviness. The patient will say the elephant is sitting on my chest. It's very heavy, and they will not be able to localize it properly. And this is typical sign that they show you. Versus pericarditis, which is more somatic, so it's very sharp, well localized pain. Myocarditis, again, it's not well localized. Aortic dissection, it's knife-like feeling, like tearing something is being torn apart in the center of the chest, radiating to the back. So that's more of aortic dissection. So the descriptions you will learn over the next couple of weeks, 3-4 weeks in the cardiac causes. So you will know the difference how this typical pain is described, and that will help you to diagnose. Cocaine can also lead to chest pain. This is the pathophysiology of ischemic pain. When you have time, just read about it. Okay, how the ischemic pain is felt or sensed. What chemicals are responsible for ischemic pain? That you need to know, like bradykinin, prostacyclin, adenosine, histamine, all these things. Okay, and also the mechanism of the referred pain is also described here. Pulmonary causes, we will do in detail later, pneumonia, pleuritis, pneumothorax. GI causes, again, esophageal spasm is very important because sometimes it can mimic cardiac pain, cardiac ischemic pain. It might come in with, it's felt in the chest, it's poorly localized, and sometimes it can get relieved with nitroglycerin. Because, why? Why esophageal pain can get relieved with nitroglycerin, esophageal spasm pain. I'll ask you next week in the LGT, okay? Remember this question. And then you have other problems. The most important thing in medicine is one thing we need to benefit the patient. The even more important is you should not harm the patient. So you should not miss the causes which can kill the patient. Okay, that is very important. So you should not miss the acute coronary syndromes. You should not miss pulmonary embolism, aortic dissection, tension pneumothorax, esophageal rupture, and in elderly pneumonia can kill them. And obviously, when there's chest pain, you want to ask all these questions, which we will discuss and in our LGD. Okay. Intermittent claudication. Do you know what is intermittent claudication? Okay. There's a pain in one or both calves, thighs, or buttocks. It's brought on by walking a certain distance. That's called claudication distance. Again, it's the same as ischemic pain. It's MI and angina is ischemia in the heart. This is ischemia in the skeletal muscles and the lower limbs. Okay. So the blood vessels supplying the lower limbs, they have some narrowing somewhere, and that leads to ischemia. And again, see all this, whether it's ischemic pain or breathlessness, it's a spectrum of severity. When there's a little problem, our physiology may be able to compensate it, and at rest we don't have symptoms. Only the symptoms come in with the effort. Whether it's angina, which comes in with exertion, or breathlessness, which comes in with exertion, and when you rest, you are fine. And when the problem becomes worse and it's not able to meet your physiological needs, then it can come even at rest. Depending on how much demand is. So it's a demand and supply problem. So this, like at rest they may not have, but when they are walking, then they will have pain. And depending if there's less problem, they are able to walk more. But as the problem increases, then they are able to walk less. So that's their claudication distance. And the same thing is in cardiac ischemia, same thing is in the breathlessness. So it's a spectrum and demand and supply. How much oxygen is needed and how much we are able to supply. So obviously when you're walking uphill, it requires more effort, this demand increases, so it becomes worse and it's relieved by rest. And suggests peripheral vascular disease. And obviously there's coldness of extremities, claudication, ulcers, and there's obstruction. So there are 5 P's: pulselessness, paralysis, paresthesia, pain, or terror. Okay. Palpitations. What is palpitation? So when you become aware of your heart beating, okay, so that's palpitation. So it may not be tachycardia, it may not be, it can happen with tachycardia, but even with normal heart rate, if one becomes aware of their heart beating, it's palpitation. And once you become aware, because normally we are not aware, so once you become aware, then you become very uncomfortable and you become anxious because it's not normal feeling. So, and it can be very unpleasant awareness of forceful, rapid, irregular breathing, and the patients describe in different ways depending on what is the cause, like flip-flopping, or rapid fluttering in the chest, or pounding in the neck. Sometimes it can happen normally when you are running, when you are rushing for something, when you are like sympathetically overdrive, when there's a tachycardia. Even sometimes like when you're running and when you stop, you feel this pounding in the neck as well. So sometimes normally it can happen. So, and most of the time it's a very common problem and it's really benign. But sometimes it can have life-threatening problem. So you need to again do a good history and examination. And when usually they come to you in the clinic, they don't have palpitations at that time. They just present with that problem. Palpitations, when they develop, it can lead to anxiety. But sometimes anxiety can lead to palpitations. So it can work in both ways, and it's very difficult to figure out what is causing what. So underlying mechanisms, one is sympathetic overdrive, or imbalance between like sympathetic parasympathetic system, so autonomic dysregulation, vagal irritation, certain drugs like sympathomimetic drugs can lead to this problem. Then there can be some structural problems, so even cardiac arrhythmias, abnormal heart rhythms, that can lead to palpitations. And then situations where we have hyperdynamic circulation. Can you give me some examples of hyperdynamic circulation? No? Like when we have more circulatory volume. No, circulatory volume. Like in fever, thyrotoxicosis.
Pregnancy.
Pregnancy, very good. So that's a physiological example. Okay, good. So cardiac arrhythmias, which you will do in third week of the CVP, and at the end of third week we have LGD and palpitations. Then there are structural causes, which you will do in fourth week. Then we have psychosomatic, psychiatric disorders like anxiety, panic disorder, systemic causes, and medication and recreational drugs. Obviously, you have to take history to figure out what is causing it and in which circumstances does it happen. Systemic causes, again, most of these are situations where either we have sympathetic overdrive or hyperdynamic circulation, like hyperthyroidism, fever, anemia, pregnancy, AV fistula, they all lead to hyperdynamic circulation. Hypoglycemia leads to sympathetic overdrive. Okay? Electrolyte imbalance, all these things can lead to. And then sympathomimetic agents like beta agonists, like in asthmatic patients taking those pump inhalers, so they can have overstimulation of sympathetic receptors, and that can lead to tachycardia and palpitation. Or someone who's on beta blocker, and all of a sudden, if they withdraw the beta blocker, that can lead to rebound effect and can lead to palpitations. And then obviously caffeine, alcohol, cocaine, all these things stimulate the sympathetic system, lead to palpitations. Like suppose on the CVP exam day in the morning, you did not sleep at night, you were anxious, you had one energy drink, you had coffee, so it's a good recipe for palpitations. Again, we'll do these presentations in the LGD. If palpitation is associated with syncope or near syncope, you should not ignore it. Okay, this can be life-threatening. This indicates a cardiac problem, some arrhythmia leading to reduced cardiac output, leading to syncope or near syncope. So you should not ignore that. So you need to know which circumstances are leading to palpitations. Okay. In diagnostic evaluation, obviously, after history and ECG and physical exam, you need to monitor their cardiac rhythm for 24 to 48 hours. Because when they come to you, they are normal. So you probably won't see anything on the ECG. It might give you a clue, but you may not find anything. So you need to do Holter monitoring. And sometimes you ask the patients to tap out the rhythm, so that will give you a clue like what sort of rhythm they are having. Okay, I think we can stop here, syncope, and then we'll do it, ankle swelling, we'll do it tomorrow. One thing, there's an assignment for you. When you go home, do percussion, auscultate yourself. In the privacy of your room, don't auscultate on the cloth. It should be directly on the skin. Auscultate at trachea, and then auscultate in the periphery, like in the lateral chest. And appreciate the difference, okay? And also in this one, you look at the JVP. There is a JVP mentioned. I have uploaded that presentation. Just have a look and read about it, because it will be easier for you to understand then. Okay, so revise that.